The Supreme Court is on the verge of ruling on some of the most politically charged issues of our time. Abortion rights, gun laws, immigration, and religious liberty are just some of a sampling of some of the 18 cases the nation's highest court will issue rulings on before taking their summer break. For more on the Supreme Court, let's bring in Jessica Levinson. She's a CBS News legal contributor and a Loyola Law School professor. Hi, Jessica. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here. So every time we hear a Supreme Court decision might be coming, I think everybody's thinking about, will it be Roe versus Wade? So as we're waiting for this decision this summer, we have seen the leaked draft on abortion rights already. But remind us, what could be different about final opinions versus the early drafts, typically?
So a lot of things. I mean, we know in the past that there have been pretty significant changes, sometimes in the way an opinion is written and sometimes in the outcome. We can think back to that big decision dealing with Obamacare and whether or not that would be upheld. I think a lot of the really good reporting indicates, and the way the opinion reads indicates, that Chief Justice John Roberts changed his vote at the very last minute, and that changed whether or not Obamacare would be upheld, which it largely was. In this case, what I suspect is that the language will soften, that it won't be quite as strident, but that the outcome will be the same. And the punchline being that there is no longer federal protection, that is no longer in the Constitution, that there is a right to obtain an abortion. And that means it's left to the states. States can allow abortion, states can completely ban abortions. One other possibility, which more and more people are talking about this week, is the idea that there wouldn't be a majority. Maybe there would be some sort of splintered opinion, or maybe Chief Justice John Roberts would be able to bring people to, I think, his preferred view, which is to uphold Mississippi's law that's a ban on abortion after 15 weeks, but not have that sentence that says we're overturning Roe. It would essentially overturn Roe. It would make it pretty close to a hollow promise, or at least a much narrower promise, but it wouldn't overturn Roe.
Interesting. Excuse me. Let's go back to kind of that first scenario that you outlined. If there is, in fact, an opinion that's similar to what we saw, but we've been talking about what that would be. But what about these arguments? I mean, what might you expect in a dissent of the opinion?
So I think what we'll see in a dissent is both an argument based on the law and then maybe a separate argument based on the consequences of what will happen. It's a guess, but I think that we will hear from Justice Breyer in his last big dissent. He's obviously retiring at the end of the term. And I think he'll write to say, this is the wrong decision on the law. We have for 50 years said that under the Constitution, we recognize that there's a right to privacy. We have for decades said that right to privacy includes the right to obtain contraception, includes the right to marry the partner of your choosing. Maybe that partner's from a different race. Maybe that partner's from the same sex, and includes the right to reproductive choice. So I think he's really going to take on the case law, the jurisprudence of it. And then we might see a dissent maybe from Justice Sonia Sotomayor saying, let's talk about what's really going to happen in America. Let's talk about what's going to happen to poor women, to women of color, to women who don't have the same resources as other women in red states, where they will likely ban abortion immediately. So I suspect those are the tracks, a legal dissent and maybe more of a legal/practical political dissent.
Interesting. Well, certainly all eyes on that decision when it comes this summer at some point. I do want to turn now to gun laws, because that's also a huge issue of discussion on Capitol Hill, but also one, of course, that the court will be ruling on in this case involving concealed carry for weapons in New York. What's the significance of this case?
It potentially smaller than people think. So this is a law, it's coming out of New York, as you said. It's about whether or not you can when you can obtain a concealed carry permit. And New York has a law which basically allows public officials some discretion. It's a may issue a permit state, as opposed to other states that are shall issue. Shall issue being you satisfy a couple of requirements, the public official has no discretion. In this case, may issue means that the public official can look and say, did you really give a good enough reason for needing this permit? So it is going to be our first big gun control case really since 2008, when Justice Scalia wrote that famous opinion in Heller, where he said there's a right to bear arms, and it's not just a right that the militia has, it's a right that individuals have as well. But it's not going to tell us everything about what the Supreme Court thinks about the Second Amendment. It's not going to tell us whether or not, for instance, President Biden's proposals are acceptable under the Second Amendment, under this court's view. So it is the first big case in over a decade, but it doesn't give us all the answers.
And in addition to that one, Jessica, what others are you looking for?
So there are two big cases dealing with this court's view of the freedom of religion. There's one case that we've talked about a lot dealing with the rights of a high school football coach to pray at the 50-yard line, whether or not he can be fired for that. There's also a case dealing with whether or not government aid can be used in religious schools. Both of those cases bring up really important questions about the separation of church and state. And then there's some important executive power administrative law questions, one dealing with whether or not President Biden can end President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, another dealing with the power of the EPA, an executive agency, and whether or not Congress granted it the power to really change greenhouse emission laws. And so those might not sound quite as sexy, but the power of administrative agencies is actually a huge legal deal with really big practical consequences. This is a big term. Obviously, the Dobbs case is on the top of the mind of so many people, but a lot of other really big cases as well.
Oh, certainly. So many political issues at stake here as well. And Jessica, the court could actually take on a new case involving elections. This is being pushed by Republicans. What more can you tell us about this?
So this is a case dealing with basically the independent state legislature doctrine. It's hard to overstate how much this might overturn our understanding of basic election laws, of issues like one person, one vote, that could have repercussions for even the Electoral College. I suspect, and this is a guess, that after this term, when the court's going to come out with the decisions we just talked about, Dobbs, the gun rights decision, the big religion decisions, when we already know that this court is going to hear a big affirmative action case next term, when we already know there are other big executive authority decisions that will be coming next term, I don't know that the court's going to want to touch this. It's so politically charged. It has such huge repercussions. But just like its decisions in redistricting, it could fundamentally change how our elections take place.
All right, Jessica Levinson, as I always tell you, I always learn so much from talking with you. Thank you so much for your time, and I know we'll be visiting with you a lot over the next couple of weeks as these decisions come down.
Thank you.